Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. I know it's been a while since the last time I actually did a video, and even though I had some planned for the month of October, especially towards the end of the month, I did not get around to making them simply because I was waiting for this little guy to appear. I didn't want to make anything until I had a microphone, and I do now, so hopefully everything sounds good. If it does, let me know. And since I didn't get to make the videos I wanted to make, I figured what I would do though is I would actually give the microphone a test with this video where we're gonna have a little walk and a talk. And at the same time, I have a new rig. It's a chest mount, so I won't have to carry this stick around. I won't be doing any of the swivel action anymore. What you'll be getting is a sort of first-person perspective, but I'll be having my hands free, which is quite nice because the weather's getting a little bit cold. It is currently the 5th of November, and the weather, as you can maybe see, is honestly, I've got a hat on, but it is it's unseasonably nice weather for what it is. And that said, my hands still get a little bit cold. So today though, we are going to be talking about, or I am going to be talking about 3 subjects, and I hope that you'll be able to follow along. They are all independent of each other, but they are all interconnected. It is a bit of a 3-body problem when it comes to the topics today. It is going to be a bit of a chaotic dance between the 3 of them, but they are all interconnected, and I do think, and I do hope that you'll be able to follow along and make sense of everything. We're going to be talking about Halloween, autumn in Moscow or autumn in Russia, and День народного единства, or Unity Day. So let's get this video switched around. Okay, so now that we got the view switched around, as I said, we're going to talk about 3 things. And today, as I said, is the 5th of November, which means yesterday, on Tuesday, was the Unity Day, or the Day of National Unity, День народного единства, which is a government holiday. It's a day off here. I actually did want to film this yesterday, but the weather was just so bad that I decided to, wait until today because I saw how nice it is. But that is ultimately beside the point, because now that it is the 5th of November, it means that we have survived another assault by the forces of evil in the form of Halloween, with Russia yet again serving as a shining bastion for all that is good and right and holy against the tides of Satanism in the world. For those of you who do not know, for the last 5 years or so, maybe 10, the Kremlin has been waging a quiet war against Halloween, which they can now slap the satanic label onto as well for additional legal liabilities for those they wish to go after. The reason for this is not some grand religious war, but simply an attempt to combat one aspect of Western culture. They just simply have nothing to counter it with. By attacking Halloween, the Russian government is partaking in the very cancel culture politics that they so frequently decry, not being as open and multi-ethnic, multinational, multi-confessional, multi-everything that they proudly trumpet about in various press conferences and official statements. So they're also ignoring the fact that some of their own traditions are godless, ergo satanic in their own measure. Take Maslenitsa, which I love, but which is ultimately a pagan holiday originally. Now nowadays the government actively promotes it annually, so a bit odd in that sense. Plus there is the Golodovanya tradition, which takes place every winter, the eve before Christmas, in which costumed individuals parade around a town from door to door, wishing people well, entertaining them with their get-ups and singing songs, also getting some treats along the way. A fair amount of that probably sounds pretty familiar, a little bit like Halloween, doesn't it? Now, with regards to why Halloween is incompatible or an alien concept to Russia, I have seen people online try to explain that Harvest Festival at the end of October in Russia is nonsense, and that there are already agricultural celebrations, traditions that exist among Russia's native peoples. I've seen the tradition Sabatuy mentioned a number of times, which is related to the completion of the sowing season. And that is a good point. Such things do exist in Russia, and they probably should get a little bit more coverage. But Sabatuy, for example, is in the spring, when the weather is already growing more pleasant, days are getting longer, people are already feeling better, a little bit more relaxed. They've got the anticipation of spring, or I guess summer coming, realistically. So Besides, Russia really only has 2 holidays, and one of them is in the late spring. So the lead up to that in the cultural field kind of eclipses everything else. And then one last thing, right? Sabatui, which is, I'm sure, a very interesting festival, and I would love to go check it out at some point in time. But it is a tradition of the Bashkir, the Chuvash, other native peoples of the Volga region. So while it is fun and entertaining for variety of sorts, it is still ultimately a niche celebration. And the lack of interest on the part of the government and the citizenry at large, it has failed at taking off as something more than that. I mean, it's a regional thing. That's fine. And that's fine. There should be plenty of regional things. Realistically, I love the Iowa State Fair, but there is no way that I would ever expect that experience to be replicated in full, like take, for example, in Arizona or Washington State. It's a regional thing, and that's fine. It should stay like that. Variety is the spice of life, and that is one of the reasons that we travel and go do things. So, Sabatui, in that regard, or other regional harvest celebrations, I don't know. I don't see it happening. In general, though, a harvest celebration, harvest festival at the end of October, it does also work from a climate perspective, simply because the southern regions of Russia, like Krasnodarsky Krai, they're still busy farming, bringing in crops into October. And honestly, aside from all that, October is the ideal time for festivities in Russia because the sun is fading faster and faster. The weather slowly goes to shit, if it hasn't already. I mean, honestly, like I said, we are extremely lucky with the weather right now. It is normally not this nice on the 5th of November. And more importantly, people just generally don't have any events or celebrations or traditions to look forward to until New Year's. It's a metaphorical desert that one has to cross from the end of summer until the end of December. So having some form of respite smack dab in the middle is just, it's logical. It's necessary. Okay. Now, there are 2 reasons as well why in modern Russia there is ultimately no escaping Halloween. From here forth, right? It's just not going anywhere. Firstly, every aspect of online culture, especially gaming, is saturated with Halloween imagery and events come October. Now, this isn't some noxious Western satanic conspiracy that the Russian government and the church would like you to believe. It simply reflects the cultures of the people who play the games. And a lot of them happen to be from North America or Western Europe. And so it's ultimately just a marketing ploy to get people to spend on events and cosmetics, which is about as sinister as the whole affair gets. Now, it's also worth questioning, why did the Russian authorities go into conniption fits over Halloween, but they don't scream bloody murder about demons attempting to corrupt their evidently monolithic society when the Lunar New Year is underway, even though that's a non-Christian celebration, also has roots and ideas connected to demons as well. I mean, the government here in Moscow even allocates funds to decorating for the event. At least they did last year. I'm going to assume that they will do so again this year as well. I would imagine other large cities around the country do as well. And it's fine. It makes it look more festive. Now, ultimately, there's the question, is that a gesture of goodwill to foreign overlords or just respecting a seasonal tradition celebrated by hundreds of millions of people around the world? And that by doing so, people here in Moscow, in Russia at large, they have the opportunity to experience something that they might not be able to otherwise due to travel restrictions, for example, or health issues. It's a chance, ultimately, to experience and do something different. And again, variety is the spice of life. I also should mention that there are traditions not originally part of one's culture that can become part of one's culture. Those traditions are accepted slowly. They mutate and assimilate over time, and they transform into something that then becomes wholly unique. We have seen versions of that with St. Patrick's Day and Cinco de Mayo. Those, at the time, were not, those are kind of things. They were not originally American holidays, and they really aren't the original version of what they set out to be. That's an entirely different conversation. But the fact remains that a culture can take on other nations' traditions and make them their own. It's just a matter of putting a little effort into it. All right, quick aside here. We are far enough into the video that I feel like kind of hiding this in here. But the reason I'm having this quick aside is because on videos like this where I criticize things about life in Russia, or I try to, I don't know, have my own point of view about things, a lot of times I'll get comments that are, I feel like, knee-jerk reactions either to the thumbnail or the title or the first minute of the video. So this little Easter egg, or whatever you will, that I have buried this far into the video, it's basically my little gift to the people who actually watch it. If I see comments down below the video that pretty clearly demonstrate that, again, the person didn't actually watch the video, or they just didn't understand at all what I was trying to say, and it's just sort of irate, hateful commentary, I'm just going to be replying to that with a clown emoji. So if you do see that, for those of you who are watching this, if you do see the clown emoji down below, that is ultimately a way for you to understand that the person whose comment I am responding to either has the attention span or the comprehension skills of a 7-year-old. Either way, you just do not need to engage with them, and that is the reason for it. I am not being unnecessarily snarky. It is just sort of the fact of the matter that, I don't know, evidently in 2025, a lot of people, or maybe they're bots or trolls, I don't know, but regardless, if we assume that they are actual living human beings with functioning brains, then God help them. But this aside is over. We're going to get back to the walk. Okay, back to the subject, or subjects at hand. So ignoring the inescapability of the influence of American/Western European cultural influence online, unless the Russian government decides to completely block the internet, which, while that is a possibility, I feel would ultimately horribly backfire on them. The other reason Halloween isn't going to disappear from Russia is that it is a celebration focused on spectacle, masquerade, things which are fun and interesting, definitely when people are younger. This couples together with the kind of the idea that, well, it's one of the ideas that I want to discuss, which is that there's really nothing to look forward to in Russia in the autumn. And some adults might cry foul here. They might say things like, well, mushroom hunting, or you can curl up on the couch with a good book, or watch a new television show, or do a puzzle, or cook something in the kitchen. But ultimately those are just indoor activities that, in general, as an adult, you spend time doing in the summer, or in the winter, I should say, and in the early spring as well, when the weather's just not very nice. So while those are, in some way, valid responses to there's nothing to look forward to in the autumn, they're not unique to the season, and they're things that you're ultimately going to be doing for a number of months from then on. So as an adult, that might be a somewhat fair retort, but it's definitely less true for kids. Now, in contrast, I feel like fall is generally a loved season in the States, even among the school-going populace, for it signals the return of aspects of popular culture, like the beginning of new seasons of television shows, more importantly, the beginning of a new season of the NFL, American football, which even as a high schooler, I didn't much care for organized sports, but I still got wrapped up in all the fervor and celebrations, tangential events like homecoming that are connected to American football. But more importantly, we've got holidays and celebrations like Halloween, obviously, as I've mentioned, but also Thanksgiving. So even though the summer comes to an end, kids have to go back to school, weather takes a turn for the worse, the days grow shorter, there are still cultural touchstones that we have to look forward to each month, with decorations and rituals and culture-wide associations that we have with them. Now, in Russia, the 1st of September simply signals the beginning of autumn, and with it, the long slog of 4 months till the end of the year, with the only break being the 4th of November, Unity Day, День народного единства. Now, I'm just going to be completely honest, and I know this is absolutely gonna piss some people off, but День народного единства is kind of a dumb holiday. I'm sorry. It's basically a Columbus Day without the genocidal implications. Prior to the collapse of the Soviet Union, the 7th of November was a holiday. It was the day of the Great October Socialist Revolution, but when the Bolsheviks' grand experiment came to an end, a government holiday celebrating that would have been a bit of a faux pas of sorts. So back in 1995, then President Boris Yeltsin changed the name of the 7th of November to the Day of the Liberation of Moscow by citizen militias under the leadership of Kuzma Minin and Dmitry Pozharsky from the Polish invaders in 1612. Kind of a bit of a question as to why that name didn't catch on, but anyway. And it was actually changed from a holiday to a day of military glory. Now, the next year, 1996, it changed again, the 7th of November changed again to the Day of Accord and Reconciliation. Now, the presidential decree behind this decision stated that, quote, the 1917 October Revolution fundamentally influenced the fate of our country in an effort to avoid future confrontation with the goal of uniting and consolidating Russian society, that basically this date is being created. Ultimately, the Day of Accord and Reconciliation was a way, in the wake of the collapse of the Soviet Union, for the government to try to keep the 7th of November as a holiday, remove the communist connotations, while at the same time pointing towards a future where people with differing beliefs and political opinions could still respect one another and work together for the greater good of the country. Not a bad idea. And this is how the day stayed until Putin came to power. And in 2004, late 2004, he reclassified the 7th of November as a day of military glory, naming it, get ready for this, the day of holding the military parade on Red Square in the city of Moscow in commemoration of the 24th anniversary of the Great October Socialist Revolution in 1914. Yes, that name is as utterly moronic as it sounds. Now later, the 7th of November did just simply become a day of the October Revolution of 1917, which is a memorial day of sorts. I hope that is not too loud. Hopefully the microphone is doing its job. But yeah, so anyway, with these changes to the 7th of November, Putin then created the 4th of November as Unity Day. And that began for the first time in 2005. And that was when the 7th of November officially lost its status as a holiday after having been one for, I don't know, probably 80 years or so. So with that brief history lesson of an aspect of modern Russian culture out of the way, we can see that the only holiday we have here in Russia in the second half of the year is all of 20 years old, technically. Now, I was here my first time in 2006, and our exchange group at the time went on a trip to St. Petersburg because we had a long weekend, and nobody really understood why there was a long weekend. We just kind of accepted it as fact. We typically had Fridays off, but we, for some reason, had an extra day on top of that. And the person in charge of sort of our study group also didn't really have a good explanation for why we had a day off. And honestly, in my experience, most people are pretty confused about Unity Day in general. Up until a few years ago, I would say most people didn't even give the holiday a second thought. It was just a day off. But that has changed a little bit. Now, the reason, like I said, that nobody really thought too much about the holiday is because it's kind of like Martin Luther King Jr. Day, or Washington's birthday, in the sense that it is a government holiday. If you work for the government or if you work in an office, you'll probably have the day off. Now, obviously here in Russia, everyone has the day off, so that is a little bit different. But, and obviously students, just like students in the United States, have a general idea as to why those holidays exist. There are lessons connected to the individuals that the holidays honor. And there's a general understanding then as to what is being celebrated. yeah, there's no actual celebration connected to the holiday in question in the States or in Russia here with Unity Day. So most people just don't give it a second thought. Now, Unity Day, they are currently trying to turn into some grand ideological thing. That started, like, I would say about 5 years ago. But the messaging is just an absolute flustercluck. It's all about the various ethnicities and nationalities within Russia, recognizing that they are Russian first and foremost, while simultaneously celebrating their uniqueness. But it's also a holiday now connected to the time of troubles after the death of Fyodor I, when Russian forces under the leadership of Minin and Pozharsky drove out the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth forces that were in control of the country at that point in time. And then they appointed Mikhail Romanov, who was the first of the Romanov dynasty, that final one of the Russian Empire. The problem is, from a historical perspective, the 1st of November, when we correct from Julian to Gregorian calendar dates, the 1st of November was when Minin and Pozharsky freed Kitai-Gorod, which in 1612 was a pretty major and important part of Moscow. That's the 1st of November, not the 4th. And then the 5th is when documents were signed for the unconditional surrender of the city to Minin Pozharsky's forces, right? The city, the capitulation of the Polish-Lithuanian forces was on the 5th of November. Nothing actually happened on the 4th. So that's also a bit of an oddity. Assigning historical significance to the 4th is a mistake, which is something to keep in mind the next time you hear a history lesson coming from the Kremlin. They evidently cannot be bothered to check dates, which is something that would have rightfully earned them the ire of their high school history teachers. But I guess, sure, whatever. Maybe they just like the number 4 for some reason. So anyway, yes, we've got a mix of a historical military victory with celebrating the various nation and national identities of everybody in Russia. There's a reason that people don't understand this holiday or don't celebrate is because it's like, how are you supposed to combine those two? Now, as to why they felt the need to preserve the holiday, right? Why not just, at the end of the Soviet Union, get rid of the 7th of November and be done with it, just come up with another holiday? You could. There are realistically 2 explanations for this. One of them is pretty logical, and one of them, I would say, is my own interpretation. Now, the first one, the most obvious one, is that it's basically impossible to take away a day off from people, especially one that is the only holiday, the only non-working day from the middle of June until the end of December. Beyond that, I kind of feel like the first years of Russia, this is my own speculation, the first years of Russia post-USSR, in that period of time, the day of the October Revolution, it had to be done away with, at the very least in name, to undermine the possibility of the Communist Party gaining enough popularity to take back the reins of power, which is something that theoretically maybe could have happened in those days. But that's not Unity. As far as Unity Day is concerned, that actually seems to be the product of Putin and those who were closest to him at that period of time, the beginning of his reign. People like Vladislav Surkov, who is an architect of much of the ideology that we see in Russia in 2025. So for them, the holiday worked kind of however they wanted it to. At first, it was a right-leaning, nationalistic sort of perspective, and nowadays it's a way to force the conversation back around to conservative traditionalism. So it's flexible, right? You can have everybody united, or you can have it militaristic. That's part of the reason why the messaging is such a mess, because it's flexible. All right, 2 more asides here. The first one being that I have noticed online a bit of a shifting of the discourse back to that whole far-right nationalistic point of view. A lot of people online were pretty miffed about the sort of unity, and they specifically wanted it to be День русского народного единства, and that basically in the English translates the day of the unity of Russian people, but in the Russian language there is the word Ruski and there's the word Российский. Российский meaning Russian in the sense of the Russian Federation as a government, and Русский in the sense of like the white Slavic Russian people, ethnically. So there has been a lot of that. I saw a ton of comments connected to that yesterday when I was just reading the news. Basically, under any story where there was any sort of mention of День народного единства, there were all sorts of commentaries talking about how we got to take the holiday back. So that does seem to be something maybe it's just in 2025 people are more terminally online, and so we're seeing more of that. But it does kind of seem like those voices are becoming louder and more prominent. The other thing that I wanted to share, and I actually have to get my notes out here, is that yesterday Putin shared a quote, and the quote was this, quote, "The Russian Federation, just like in 1612, is defending its sovereignty," end quote. The reason that's on paper it sounds pretty good, right? It's like, oh, okay, so yes, defending sovereignty. But the problem is in 1612, the people who were sitting in the Kremlin in 1612 were the enemies of the people. And it took two brave men, young individuals, to rally the people together and overthrow the government that was sitting in the Kremlin at that point in time. So it's just like, I don't know, maybe he writes his own speeches, maybe he has a speechwriter. If he has a speechwriter, he should maybe consider getting a different one, because that is not a good quote. And if he's writing his own speeches, maybe he should get a speechwriter so somebody can check it, because it seems like, I mean, if you understand the history, comparing yourself and the current situation to 1612 is maybe not the smartest idea. So we're going to cross the street real fast, but realistically, saying something like that's probably not a good idea. But anyway, let me kick us back around. So, the messaging of Unity Day is a mess. It's only existed for technically 20 years, and the majority of the time no one paid any attention to it aside from getting a random day off at the start of November, which is fine. But yeah, the muddled nature and lack of imagery, associations, celebrations stands in stark contrast to Halloween. Yes, I have come back around to the topic of Halloween. I told you they're all interconnected. Now, do I expect that Halloween will become a celebration adopted by Russians? Only in as much as I can imagine them taking to the Lunar New Year, which is to say, probably for young people, citizens of large cities, and people who just like an excuse to have a little fun in a season that is typically pretty dismal. But all of this is to come to the point that the Russian government attempting to ban Halloween is, first of all, it's literal cancel culture, but more importantly, unless they plan on implementing mass fines and arrests, which honestly isn't something I would put past them, there's no defeating it, as there's nothing that Russia has to compete with Halloween. And in classic Streisand effect, the more they try to cancel and ban it, the more attractive it becomes, the more people want to do it. Now, one last thing I should probably mention, which is that in the last few years, Russian news outlets and politicians and all other forms of propaganda pushers available to the Kremlin's disposal, they've bandwagoned onto the need to celebrate the Slavic version of Halloween, which is Tikvany Spas, or maybe Velisova Noch, or maybe both. They actually seem kind of confused themselves. Start with the first one. About 5 years ago, maybe 10, the idea of Tikvany Spas, which translates awkwardly enough into the Pumpkin Feast of the Savior, started to get kicked around as the Orthodox equivalent to Halloween. It also conveniently happens to fall on the 31st of October, and many of the legends and ancient traditions around the holiday sound lifted straight out of the pagan rituals of Halloween and Samhain. What are the odds of that, right? The one difference is that on the Pumpkin Feast day, you're supposed to eat everything pumpkin and squash, which is pretty unique. I will give it that. But the problem is the name is connected to various other religious feasts. There is the apple feast of the Savior, the honey feast of the Savior, the nut feast of the Savior, Яблочный Spas, Медовый Spas, Ореховый Spas. But if you look into the calendar of the Russian Orthodox Church, the pumpkin feast is absent. It's just not there. In fact, various members of the church have called the pumpkin feast idiotic. Or honestly, they've called it worse things too, but we'll go with idiotic. So if you go digging around online, what you'll find is that the first mention of Tikveni Spas comes from about 8 years ago from a school in the Russian city of Izhevsk. And ultimately, the story behind this supposedly sort of traditional Orthodox religious holiday is that the school wanted to come up with a non-Western version of Halloween that was still Halloween, and they just gave it this name that sounded, connected to the church. So the pumpkin feast of the Savior is actually dollar store Halloween, right? It's the generic knockoff with the oddball name. The other replacement for Halloween, Velisova Noche, or the Velesian night, if you will, also just so happens to fall on the evening of the 31st, and has a lot of the same similarities with Halloween. Two coincidences. What are the odds of that, right? But again, if you read the information available about it online, it seems identical to Halloween in many ways, like I mentioned, but there's a hella neo-paganism bent to the whole thing. If you dig further online, the first mentions of the holiday begin to crop up about a decade ago, but there's absolutely no information or any sort of information to reputable links with regards to this. I have seen heated arguments online with folklorists demanding that the authors of essays connected to Velisova Noche, where did they get their information? These folklorists have been looking and trying to find any sort of proof of this. And the folklorists the authors of the essays sometimes get a little bent out of shape. And ultimately their sources boil down to, well, my grandmother told me about it once when I was a kid, way back in the 1970s, which, that's anecdotal evidence. You're the only person, and realistically, that's not a source. If it is a source, it's 60 years old and you have no documented evidence. So, yes, it's pretty safe to say that Velisova Noche, or Velesian night, is another Halloween derivative, just adorned this time in the mythology of Slavic neo-paganism to make it seem a little bit more valid or perhaps more palatable or more attractive. There's nothing wrong with that. I think that having some sort of neo-paganistic holiday, I love Maslenitsa, but Maslenitsa realistically is that same idea. There's nothing wrong with them. They should actually go into it, but attempting to just slap it on top of Halloween, I think, is an idiotic idea. And I do want to say right now, we're actually coming to the end of the video, the end of this section of the Boulevard Ring, but I do want to point out that personally, I enjoy the autumn here in Russia and Moscow. I used to kind of hate it, but I've adapted to it and I'm used to it now, so it's one of those things that it doesn't bother me as much. So for anyone who in the comments wants to say something pretty negative about that too, you might just get the clown emoji, because realistically, I don't think there's anything wrong with it. But that's not to say that everything that I was going on about here is less valid. I do wish that Russia had more of its own holidays and celebrations in the fall, especially ones that gave us a bit more time off, ones that had some meaning for the citizens. Even official state-run surveying organizations were lamenting on День народного единства, on Unity Day. They were lamenting how people don't understand the holiday, don't care about it, because there are no symbols or traditions to rally around to help cement it in the cultural consciousness. And honestly, good luck with that. It's pretty much an impossible task. It's a Sisyphean task at this point in time. As it stands, there are two holidays in Russian culture. There is New Year's, and then there's Victory Day on the 9th of May. Ostensibly, there are two other ones in the late winter, but seeing as how the decorations for New Year's Eve are already up here in Moscow, you might have noticed a few of them as I was walking around. And those decorations are not going to get taken down until late March, early April, at which point in time the Georgievsky Lenty and the war posters for Victory Day, they will start going up in April as well. So it's basically the New Year's Eve decorations come down in the late spring, and the Victory Day celebration decorations go up pretty much at the same time, and the Victory Day decorations, those stay up realistically until early autumn in a lot of cases. Again, that is maybe just a Moscow thing, but I feel like it's similar to that in most large countries, or most large city around the country. Ultimately though, that is more of a discussion for another time. Those two holidays eclipse everything else, and who knows, maybe in December, we'll have another walk and talk, and we'll do a little bit of that. So yeah, that is kind of all that I've got to say about that. It's a lot, I know, and realistically, this is not necessarily the video that I wanted to make late October, early November. I had quite a few planned that were kind of connected to psychos and killers and things like that in Moscow, you know, going with the Halloween vibe. There's nothing wrong with that. I'm all for it, but due to the fact that the microphone did not get here in a timely fashion, probably due to the backlog of semis currently sitting at the Kazakhstan-Russian border, probably due to that. But as it is, I guess I have those videos already kind of prepped and ready to go for next year, 2026. You're just gonna have to wait a little bit for them. But yeah, that said, the ideas that I discussed here connected to Halloween and the Russian government, I suppose, and churches, relationship to it, just in general, autumn and the lack of holidays here, and the 4th of November, Unity Day, День народного единства. These are all things that I have thought about for numerous years now. Every time we get to the end of October, early November, these discussions come up time and time again, at least for the last 5 or 6 years for sure. Again, if we go back to when Tikvany Spas first appeared about 8 years ago, you could even say as far back as 10 years ago. And while there are probably some aspects that I could have included or things that I may have forgotten, I think by and large, the general idea should have been comprehensible. If it was, please leave a like, because it took me a long time to get all of those sort of ideas compiled and put together in a somewhat coherent form. If you just enjoyed seeing me, also leave a like. Subscribe, obviously, too, if you haven't done that already. The other thing, if you just enjoyed the walk around the city, I was just cutting circles in the area between Arbat and Ostozhenka, or Prechistenka, I don't remember. I was actually on that road for a little bit too. Doesn't matter. I'm just sort of cutting circles in a part of the city that I think is kind of nice to walk in, and realistically has some nice autumn scenery. So if you enjoyed that too, obviously leave a like. But now that I have that camera set up and the microphone set up, which also in the comments let me know if things looked good and sounded good, and if this format is something that you are into, I really should just wrap this video up now. It has been going on probably for far too long, but it was a big subject and I wanted to get through all of the points that I had to make. So yeah, like, subscribe, leave a comment, as long as it's kind of a rational and somewhat constructive one. Otherwise you'll get the clown emoji. But yeah, I'll be back hopefully relatively soon with more videos, more interesting things about the country that I can share with you, just more insights. You could always tune into the live streams too. I do those a few times a week, twice with the news and current events, and once with music, if that's your thing. But regardless, yeah, I hope you found this informative or enjoyable, or at least just pretty to look at. Anyway, if you're watching this, take care of yourselves. Have a nice autumn, what's left of it, and I'll be back soon enough, I hope. So take care of yourselves. I will see you when I see you. And until then, this has been Russia in Context. Thanks for watching.